What if I told you that you've been robbed your entire life and you never even noticed? Not by some masked criminal in an alley, not by a hacker stealing your credit card, but by the very institutions that promise to protect you, to work for you, to build a better future for you and your family. Governments love to talk about your financial freedom. They flood the news with words like stability, growth, opportunity. They shake hands, cut ribbons, and promise prosperity. But here's what they don't tell you. For centuries, those in power have used the exact same financial tricks to quietly drain wealth from ordinary people while consolidating money and control at the top. And the most disturbing part? These aren't new schemes. They're ancient tactics, recycled through every generation, wrapped in fresh packaging, sold under modern names. But the purpose never changes. Transfer wealth upward, keep the majority dependent, and make sure you never realize what's happening until it's too late. Let me show you how deep this goes. We'll start with the oldest trick in the book. It's so simple, so effective, that it's been used for over 2,000 years. It's called inflation. But don't let that bland word fool you. What it really means is this. Your government is stealing from you in broad daylight, and they're doing it without ever asking permission. Here's how it works. Imagine a government that's spending more money than it's collecting in taxes. Maybe there's a war to fight. Maybe there are palaces to build. Maybe politicians just made too many promises they can't afford. Now they've got two choices. Option 1, raise taxes openly and honestly. But that's political suicide. People hate taxes. They vote you out. They riot in the streets. So governments choose option 2, quietly destroy the value of the money already in your pocket. Ancient Rome perfected this trick. In the 3rd century after Christ, Roman emperors were facing constant military threats and enormous expenses. They needed money fast, but raising taxes was too dangerous. So instead, they did something brilliant and evil at the same time. They started debasing the currency. Picture a silver coin, the denarius. For decades, it had been made of nearly pure silver. People trusted it. It had weight, value, stability. But slowly, quietly, the emperors began changing the recipe. They reduced the silver content and replaced it with cheap copper. At first, just a little, then more, then even more. Eventually, what had once been a solid silver coin was mostly copper, with just a thin coating of silver on the outside to fool people. The empire pretended nothing had changed. The coins still looked the same. They still had the emperor's face stamped on them. But everyone holding those coins was paying a hidden price. Inflation exploded. Prices skyrocketed. Savings became worthless. Wages couldn't keep up. Ordinary Romans watched their financial security evaporate, and most of them never understood why. It was a silent tax, a theft that required no announcement, no vote, no consent, just quiet manipulation of the money supply. And here's the kicker. This exact trick is still being used today. The only difference is that now, instead of emperors melting down coins, we have central banks creating money out of thin air with the push of a button. But inflation is just the beginning. Let's move forward a few centuries. During the Middle Ages, European monarchs developed another financial weapon: forced loans. Kings in England, France, and Spain would routinely approach wealthy merchants and guilds and politely ask them to lend money to the crown. Of course, these requests weren't really requests, they were orders. Refuse, and you might face fines, confiscation of property, imprisonment, or worse. Sometimes the king promised to pay the money back with interest. Sounds fair, right? Except repayment almost never happened as promised. Sometimes it came decades late. Sometimes it came in currency that had been devalued to worthlessness. Sometimes it never came at all. Meanwhile, the government got to fund its wars, build its castles, and maintain its power, all while merchants had no choice but to hand over their wealth. The trick here wasn't complexity. It was coercion, dressed up as patriotic duty. You're serving your king, you're protecting your country. But in reality, it was legalized robbery, and it worked for centuries. By the time we reached the 17th century, something even more insidious emerged. The financial system itself became the trick. In 1694, Britain created the Bank of England. Now, this wasn't some act of charity or public service. The government desperately needed money to fight costly wars with France, but it had already exhausted traditional sources of revenue. So they came up with a clever solution. They offered wealthy investors the chance to buy government bonds. In return, the Crown guaranteed interest payments funded by taxes. On the surface, this seems like a fair deal. The government gets money now, investors get paid back later with interest. Everybody wins, right? Wrong. Think about who actually paid those taxes. It wasn't the wealthy investors. It was ordinary people, taxed on everyday goods like salt, beer, bread, and cloth. The wealthy lent money to the government and earned guaranteed, risk-free returns. The poor paid higher taxes to fund those returns. It was a perfect wealth transfer system disguised as sophisticated national finance. And here's the truly diabolical part. This system cemented a pattern that still dominates the world today. The safest investments on earth are government bonds. Lending money to governments is considered the gold standard of financial security. But those returns, those guaranteed payments, are ultimately backed by the taxes and labor of ordinary citizens. The masses work, the elite collect. Now let's fast forward to the modern world, because this is where things get really ugly. Take deficit spending. Governments today run up debts so massive they're almost impossible to comprehend. Trillions upon trillions of dollars, euros, pounds. They issue bonds that are bought by investors, banks, pension funds, and foreign powers. Politicians sell this to the public as necessary investment, infrastructure, jobs, healthcare, education. But look closer at where the money actually goes. Defense contractors get billion-dollar deals. Corporations receive subsidies and tax breaks. Politically connected industries get bailouts. And when it's time to pay the debt back, do governments cut spending at the top? Do they tax the wealthiest? Rarely. Instead, they raise taxes on the middle class, inflate the currency to reduce the real value of the debt, or slash social programs that ordinary people depend on. The trick is that the debt is marketed as being for the people, but the burden always lands on their shoulders, while the profits flow to bondholders and insiders. And then there are bailouts. Let's talk about 2008. Banks and financial institutions took reckless, idiotic bets. They bundled toxic mortgages into complex securities, sold them as safe investments, and nearly collapsed the entire global economy. When the house of cards fell, who paid the price? Ordinary taxpayers, through massive government bailouts funded by public money. Trillions of dollars were handed over to save institutions that had caused the crisis in the first place. And who profited afterward? Those same banks. They emerged bigger, more powerful, and more concentrated than before. Meanwhile, millions of ordinary people lost their homes, their jobs, their savings. The trick was brutally simple. Privatize the gains when times are good, socialize the losses when things go bad. And the public was told this was necessary to save the system. But here's the question nobody asked. Whose system? A system like this isn't designed to serve you. It's designed to extract from you. Even the way governments handle pensions and retirement is a carefully constructed illusion. For decades, people in the United States, Britain, across Europe, and around the world have paid into government-managed retirement systems. They trusted that when they got old, when they could no longer work, that money would be there for them. But here's the dirty secret. Governments don't actually save that money. They spend it immediately. They use it to cover current expenses, fund programs, and pay debts. In its place, they leave IOUs, promises that future taxpayers will cover the cost when the bill comes due. It's essentially a generational Ponzi scheme, dressed in official language and bureaucratic jargon. It works fine as long as there are always more young workers paying in than old retirees taking out. But what happens when demographics shift, when populations age and birth rates fall? Suddenly, the system becomes unsustainable. And what do governments do then? They reform the system. They raise the retirement age. They reduce benefits.
They inflate away the real value of payouts. They tell you it's necessary, responsible, the only way forward. But what it really means is that you paid in your whole life, and now they're changing the deal. Notice the pattern here. At every single stage, the trick relies on one thing: perception. The public is told inflation is just economic growth. Forced loans are patriotic duty. National debt is investment in the future. Bailouts are necessary for stability. Pension cuts are common sense reform. The language is carefully chosen to mask the reality underneath: a steady, relentless transfer of wealth from the many to the few, from the bottom to the top. And this trick has worked for centuries because most people never study economic history. They don't understand how financial systems actually work.
They don't see the trap until they're already caught in it. In recent decades, the tricks have only gotten more sophisticated, more hidden, more effective. Consider something called quantitative easing. Before 2008, most people had never even heard this term. It sounds technical, boring, safe. But here's what it really means. Central banks created trillions of dollars, euros, and pounds out of absolutely nothing. They used this newly created money to buy government bonds and mortgage-backed securities, injecting cash into the financial system to prevent collapse. Politicians and bankers reassured everyone this was necessary, temporary, responsible. And it worked for the financial system. Asset prices exploded, stocks soared, real estate values skyrocketed, bonds surged. But here's the question: who owns most of those assets? The wealthy, the top 10%, the elite. For the average household without large investment portfolios, the benefits were minimal. But the downsides? Rising living costs, distorted markets, wealth inequality that reached levels not seen since the Gilded Age. The trick was that money creation saved the system for those at the top while fueling inflation and widening the gap for everyone else. Then there's stealth taxation. Governments today have learned that raising income taxes directly makes people angry. It's visible, it's obvious. People notice when their paychecks shrink. So instead, they tax you in ways you barely notice. Sales taxes, fuel duties, fees, licenses, and most of all, inflation itself. When prices rise faster than your wages, that gap is effectively a hidden tax on your savings and purchasing power. Your money buys less, but your paycheck doesn't grow to match. Governments love this because inflation reduces the real value of their debts while quietly draining your wealth. You might feel richer because your salary number is higher, but if your costs rise even faster, you're actually getting poorer. This isn't a bug, it's not an accident. It is the system working exactly as designed. Inflation is one of the most consistent, effective tricks governments have ever deployed to shift the burden of their spending onto you without ever admitting it. And then there's regulatory capture. On paper, regulations exist to protect you. Financial rules, safety standards, consumer protections, they all sound good. But look closer at history and you'll see a different story. Time and time again, the industries being regulated end up controlling the regulators. Railroads in the 1800s shaped the rules meant to oversee them. Oil companies in the 1900s did the same. Today, it's tech giants and financial institutions. They hire former regulators, they fund political campaigns, they write the legislation themselves and hand it to politicians to pass. The public sees protection. Insiders see profit and the elimination of competition. War finance is another ancient trick in modern clothes. During World War I and World War II, governments issued massive bond campaigns, telling citizens it was their patriotic duty to buy them. People genuinely believed they were supporting their nation, and they were. But those bonds also became lucrative, risk-free investments for the wealthy, guaranteed by future taxes extracted from everyone else. In the 21st century, the pattern continues. Trillions spent on wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere were financed through debt. Defense contractors made fortunes, banks collected interest, bondholders got paid, and ordinary taxpayers? They shouldered the bill, a bill that will take generations to pay off, long after the last soldier has come home. Governments also weaponize complexity itself. Tax codes thousands of pages long, financial instruments so complicated that even professionals struggle to explain them. Budgets filled with hidden line items, obscure programs, and bureaucratic jargon. All of this creates an environment where ordinary citizens cannot possibly track how money is flowing. Complexity becomes camouflage. When you can't see the transfer of wealth, you can't resist it. In ancient Rome, debased coins were physical proof of the trick. You could feel the lighter weight, see the copper showing through. Today, the theft is hidden in balance sheets, buried under acronyms, disguised as policy. The trick is the same. Make it too complex for the public to follow, and the transfer can proceed unnoticed and unopposed. So why does this matter right now, today, in your life? Because these tricks are alive, active, and accelerating. Inflation is eating away at your savings faster than at any point in decades. National debts are larger than they've ever been in human history. Bailouts remain the automatic reflex whenever markets wobble. Central banks continue manipulating the money supply on a scale that would have been unimaginable 50 years ago. And governments keep passing costs onto the public in forms so indirect, so cleverly disguised that most people never connect the dots. The result is a system designed to keep you working harder for less real wealth while the financial elite grow richer, more powerful, and more protected. The lesson from history isn't just that these tricks exist, it's that they always return. When Rome debased its coins, ordinary citizens suffered, while emperors maintained power. When medieval monarchs forced loans, merchants lost fortunes while kings built castles. When modern states inflate and borrow, households bear the burden while bondholders collect. Different ages, different technologies, different language, same mechanism, same result. And here's the harshest truth of all. Most people will never escape these tricks because they don't even realize they're being played. They accept inflation as natural, inevitable, just the way things are. They see taxes as unavoidable. They view bailouts as necessary acts of mercy. They believe the government messaging instead of studying the patterns of history. And that ignorance, that lack of awareness, is the most powerful trick of all. When people forget the past, they cannot recognize its repetition. When they don't understand the game, they can't protect themselves. That's why governments and financial elites prefer a public that's uneducated in economics and history. Financial literacy is resistance. Economic history is a weapon. If you know the tricks, you become much harder to manipulate. So, what should you do with this information? First, always look beyond the headline. When governments announce stimulus packages, ask who profits first. When inflation rises, remember it's not bad luck or coincidence, it's policy, and someone benefits. When new regulations appear, ask who wrote them and who they really protect. Second, build real wealth outside the system's traps. Focus on assets that can hold value even when currency doesn't. Understand that cash savings are designed to lose value over time in an inflationary system. Third, never assume the system works for you just because it says it does. Systems exist to protect themselves and those who control them, not you. Your financial freedom is your responsibility, not theirs. History doesn't repeat exactly, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you all the same. The financial tricks that kept Roman citizens broke, that drained medieval merchants, that built the fortunes of industrial-age bankers, those same tricks are draining your bank account today. They're just dressed in modern language, hidden behind complexity, and sold with better marketing. The only difference between being a victim and being aware is whether you recognize the game in time. If this gave you a new perspective, if it made you see the system differently, hit subscribe. History has the answers, the patterns, the warnings, and I'll keep showing you exactly where to look.